I'm going to kickstart. We're just a couple of minutes past 1 o'clock. Good afternoon. My name is Morag Stewart. I'm the Regional Manager of the PRCA Northern Ireland, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. As the largest PR membership association, the PRCA acts as a voice for the industry, raises standards, provides a range of training and qualifications and networking events, and a platform to come together to discuss common issues. So indeed, this spring, the PRCA Northern Ireland Committee and Chair identified a real need to explore and share the huge contribution PR has made to organisations' survival and success during the pandemic in this region. And members LK Comms, and in particular Jerry Wright, worked hard to bring this important discussion to the table today with an exciting lineup of guests and Stephen Waddington as chair to join the dots. So with no further ado, I am going to kick off and hand over to Jerry. Just very quickly in housekeeping, we have a lot to discuss. So we're going to hold the Q&As to the end. Please use the Q&A function as we go along to drop anything, maybe highlight who the question's for if it is specific, and we will get to those at the end. Any that we don't get to, we will endeavour to come back to you in person with a response from a panellist and follow up that way. So I will hand over to Jerry, and yeah, looking forward to it. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Morag, and it's great to be part of this event today in association with the PRCA in Northern Ireland. Thanks to everyone for joining us this afternoon. As Morag said, I'm Jerry Wright. I'm a Senior Client Director at LK Communications, and I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce you to our esteemed panellist lineup today. So firstly, I'd like to introduce our chair of the event, Stephen Waddington, who many of you will know. Stephen is Managing Partner of WADS Inc., a boutique professional firm for creative agencies and communications teams. He's held the role of Visiting Professor in Practice at Newcastle University since 2014, supporting the university and students through teaching and mentoring. Stephen's also the author of the UK's leading blog on communication and has written numerous books on marketing and PR, including Exploring PR Management Communication, Brand Anarchy, Share This, and Chartered Public Relations. So next up, I'm delighted to introduce Aoife Clarke. Aoife is Head of Communications for Lidl in Ireland and Northern Ireland. Aoife joined Lidl in 2008 after working with Slattery Communications, and she was the first PR hire in Ireland, and her responsibilities have now grown to include PR, internal comms, events, and CSR. So during her time with the company, Aoife also spent 6 months in Lidl's international headquarters based in Germany. She studied for a BA in Global Business on a dual degree programme between DCU and Northeastern University in Boston, before completing a postgrad diploma in PR and event management. And Aoife also sits on the Public Relations Institute of Ireland's Education Committee. I'd also like to welcome Colin Johnston to our panel today, who no doubt will be a familiar face for many. Colin has more than 25 years of experience in the hospitality industry, and since joining Galgorm Collection in 2001, Colin has held several senior management roles before taking the helm as Managing Director in 2016. So during this time, Colin has managed the integration and £60 million development phase at Galgorm Spa and Golf Resort, as well as 2 Belfast City Centre restaurants, Café Parisien and Fratelli. And more recently, Colin has spearheaded the vision for the £10 million renovations of the former Templeton Hotel, which has been rebranded to the Rabbit Hotel and Retreat. The collection continues to expand with the purchase of the Old Inn at Crawfordsburn, and with plans for a boutique hotel and restaurant and bar on the Ormer Road in Belfast. And Colin is also the chair of Mid and East Antrim Tourism Recovery Task Group. And last but by no means least, I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce Richard Buckley, editor and publisher of Business Eye, Northern Ireland's independent business publication. So Richard set up the company alongside his wife Brenda back in 1999 and has helped to develop its digital channels over more recent years. Business Eye is also synonymous with Northern Ireland's leading business awards, back in the day when such events were allowed by the government. Richard finds it hard to believe that he's been a working journalist for more than 40 years, but intends to keep on writing until the nursing home beckons. And thankfully, that's not anytime soon, Richard. So a very warm welcome to all of our panelists. So today's webinar will focus on the power of PR for post-pandemic recovery. And at the centre of today's discussion is a new research report, which explores the impact of COVID-19 on professional communications and the strategic role that PR has played during this time through an unprecedented period of our history. So as contributor to the report, I'd like to hand you over now to Stephen Waddington to talk us through the main findings. Stephen.
Thanks, Jerry. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, colleagues, for joining us. I look forward to this discussion because I think, undoubtedly we've come through a really awful, hard period, both personally. I've never spent more time in my life with my wife. Fortunately, we're still together and it's all going well so far. Or with children, homeschooling. It has been really, really, really tough. But I'm an optimist. I'm really upbeat about what's to come. I've lived through 4 or 5 recessions now, worked through 4 or 5 recessions. With every recession, there is an energy afterwards, and tons and tons of opportunity. And I think that's where we are today for colleagues in the communication professions. So I've done a couple of pieces of work. Jerry kindly mentioned the piece of work I did with GCS, where right in the heart of the first lockdown, I met with colleagues, the leaders of the professional associations in marketing and public relations, to talk about the impact on the profession. And Francis Ingham was there representing the PRCA. We met every week to talk about, right the way through from the outset in March, where we had that period where everyone went to remote working, colleagues were put on furlough. There was almost an emergency response by our industry. Then as it bedded down, furlough bit in, colleagues, organisations reorganised, but communications really came to the fore. And so I produced this report in July last year. It was published in August, September time, and it's based on a lit review of content that was written during this incredible period in our history, but also interviews with colleagues throughout the UK about their own personal experiences and professional experiences. The one big lesson from it is it really showed up the role of communications strategically in supporting management. So practitioners showed their compassion and positivity in helping organizations and people truly navigate the crisis. They helped organizations make tough decisions, reorganizing, advising and reshaping them for recovery. They've demonstrated they're agile, they're innovative and truly reflective in their practice. So we published this report and I'll share it in the chat once I finish talking. I'll also stick it out on Twitter, but there's 8 main findings from it. And I just wanted to give you the headlines from each, as well as some of the little bits of insight and nuggets that I learned along the way. So the first finding is this shift we saw in the industry to virtual communication. So in lots of industries, there's been this talk about remote working for 20 years. It's been around for as long as my career. We had to live it, truly live it. In March, there was that weekend in the 3rd weekend in March, where every organization, because of the government's guidance, had to become virtual, and so people literally clutched their laptops and their computers and headed to their homes or bedrooms to work from home, and that's created a tremendous amount of opportunity around remote working, around different ways of working. It's also created challenges in different forms of using different forms of technology and workflow. I think as we look to what comes next, there's no doubt that the lessons we've learned through virtual working are going to continue, and the future has got to be some sort of hybrid location, because people have realized the benefits of working from home, but also they've realized they really miss people. I really miss working with people. I really miss seeing people and working, in an office. You miss those moments of serendipity. You really do. So, lots of organizations have brought in fantastic technology, virtual social networks and all sorts of things. Every meeting's on Zoom. This event's taking place on Zoom. But there's no replacement for face-to-face meetings. So that's the first one, the lessons of hybrid working. Second thing is communications really showed up. I mean, you can't say anyone's had a good pandemic, can you have a good pandemic? But communication really has showed up well, both as a strategic function and a leadership function. So it's been absolutely critical in helping organizations and the leaders within organizations manage stakeholders through the crisis. And, that ranges from unfortunately, the areas of the economy that were shut down, managing stakeholders around them, but also, the areas of the economy that have boomed and helping manage that. Also in public sector and public services, if communications wasn't part of a senior management team, goal commands, resilience meetings before COVID, it almost certainly is now, because organizations have recognized you need the skills in listening, planning and engaging, both internally and externally. There's lots of examples in the report of organizations that have communicated, sort of over communicated through the pandemic in order to ensure that they communicate with all the different stakeholders. Third thing is, so that's management and leadership. Third thing is our own workflow. So within public relations, within communication teams, we've really adopted technology. Previously I characterized our adoption technology quite piecemeal. We take a bit of Slack, take a bit of Google Hangouts or whatever, and we use it as point solutions. Here, because everyone's been forced into a virtual working environment, we've had to change how we've worked. We've had to adapt to agile techniques. We've had to have daily stand-up meetings around projects, and we've adopted software in the way we haven't previously. We've also seen, from a media point of view, owned media really take a move to the forefront. So organizations communicating through their own websites right at the heart of their communication, putting them right at the heart of the communication effort. And there's lots of examples in the report of that as well. Especially in public services, if you want to get a message clearly to a community, to a group of stakeholders, stick it out first on your own channels. I've mentioned the increasing strategic role of communications within organizations. Particularly want to call out anyone that works in internal communications. Internal communications have previously been regarded as the guys that put the posters up in the bathrooms or on the walls. And no, the story from COVID could not be any different. And the reason for that is very simple. As organizations have gone virtual, or if they haven't gone virtual, they've had to put in place social distancing and manage the way around the community. They've been absolutely reliant on internal communications to do that. With internal communications working remotely, with organizations working remotely, internal communications have also been responsible for helping leaders drive productivity. And we've seen almost a hyper level of engagement through, we've all got it, driven mad by Slack channels and such like. And there's got to be some sort of shakedown and shakedown there, because again, we've over communicated rather than under communicated. There's also a really interesting feature around the humanization of communication. I'm not even sure that's a word, but when I tell you what I mean, you'll understand. And that's how, because we've invited each other literally into our kitchens and our bedrooms, as we've been working remotely, we've been talking more openly and candidly. Everybody has been in this together, so there's been a more emotional attitude to communication, and you've seen that through organizational leaders. So I spoke to the team of BT, and BT, their leadership communication used to be very precise, very clipped, very candid, very stage managed. Now the CEO turns up on a call on a Friday and just takes questions, and it's that kind of attitude that's been brilliant to see. Been a massive shift to digital, so anything out of home hasn't worked, because during lockdown it just wouldn't, and so that's been a boom, both for the social networks, for the platforms, but also for any media vested digitally. And consumers have turned to new ways to keep connected, informed and entertained. Every single number I'd urge you to go and look at the Ofcom reports. Also, there's a report out today from the Reuters Institute. around the boom in news, the boom in Netflix, the boom in TikTok. These trends are almost certainly here to stay. Social media, messaging, video, it's all up. And there's this almost hackneyed phrase now that we've seen. I think even McKinsey said it first of all, but we've seen in 3 months we've seen 3 years of acceleration in the adoption of technology. It's probably even more powerful. My sixth point is multi-agency work in the power of networks. Now, because we've had to work in new ways, we've had to, we've been literally on a war footing fighting a pandemic. A lot of the bullshit that you get out of that you find in politics within organizations in working together has just been cut out of the way. And I've seen that a lot amongst all sorts of organizations, from the NHS to central government to public services, where previously where you'd have to spend 3 months justifying creating a WhatsApp group or a Facebook group, or doing something that you'd have to go through the brand police and lawyers and all the rest to get through. It's just been possible to do it because we've had to do it, because communication is critical first and foremost. There's also been a multi-agency approach. I've done quite a bit of work for the NHS during this time. Multi-agency approach in response to the pandemic, just on a local footing in local NHS trusts working together with local authorities, and as part of national parks, as part of resilience groups, and that's been great to see. There was that moment, and the seventh point is about equality and communication equality. There's that moment in May 2020 when we saw the rise of unfortunately the death of George Floyd and the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, when people really, that was an absolute moment during this crisis where people really took stock, and organizations were a call to account to address their own diversity, but also in how they communicated. And that coincided with beginning to talk about and think about the rollout of the vaccine and the need to understand how we communicate with all these different types of audiences. So in practice, that has been something that's really come to the fore, the need to communicate equally across all sorts of different types of audiences, and that has also brought into it a focus on things like visual impairment, audio impairment, as we've moved so much to a virtual environment. And that's great to see. Final point is dealing with disinformation and misinformation. So tons of it, and I'm sure we're going to hear in a moment from colleagues about toilet roll shortages, and the nonsense that supermarkets had to cope with around cleaning products, fresh vegetables, and all that sort of stuff that caused shortages. But that's a really serious issue. But we also saw issues with misinformation around just basic information around COVID, right the way through to adversarial and hostile information from targeted at a nation state level. So there's been a right the way across the public and private sector. There's been this alert to managing misinformation, and that's something that continues. And I think we're going to see, as we emerge from the crisis, the big tech companies called out and held to account for that, because they've absolutely got to be. So quick whistle stop tour through that report. I'll share it, and I would encourage anyone to read it if you're working in professional communications. There's a skills matrix at the end where we plot the skills we're going to need in each of these areas as we emerge from the crisis. And and I hope we'll come on to talk to that. But the main things that I think we should be thinking of is shift to hybrid and how we manage that, our opportunity to work at a management level, and then this ongoing narrative around the shift to digital. That's me, Jerry. Thank you.
Perfect, Stephen. Thank you so much. Some really interesting insights there, and I'm sure many of us find ourselves nodding in agreement there to some of the trends that you'd mentioned. I'd like to just delve in a little deeper to some of those areas, and also invite our expert panelists now to give their thoughts on some of these topics. So you touched on the shift to the virtual communication team, and I think our panelists are able to provide a really unique perspective here on how businesses adapted to lockdown restrictions. Aoife, if we start with you, I guess, as an essential retailer, Lidl Northern Ireland was on the front line of the pandemic response. Can you tell us a bit about how Lidl responded to this and what your strategy was around communications during that time?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting, I suppose, listening back to all the research that's been carried out and people's feedback, and I absolutely identify with so much of it. I think for us, what I kind of felt at the time was, and it was something that Dr. Mike Ryan from the World Health Organization said, was speed trumps perfection, and you have to be fast and have no regrets. And I think sometimes as communicators, you know, we may be obsessed with over having everything right before we communicate anything, but in this instance, speed really was really critical for us. For our teams on the front line, they needed to be reassured that we were doing everything that we could to support them, and so that they could deliver to customers every single day. So we got into a really good routine early on. I was part of the business continuity team, so I do report anyway directly to the CEO, but I sat on that team. So every day we met at 9 a.m. There was 5 people. We kept it as tight as possible, just to kind of keep things moving. So every day at 9 a.m. I'd be on that call. We'd generally take an hour. The first few weeks, you know, we were a bit longer. We'd run through what our tasks and priorities are for the day, and we'd keep a log of everything. So we'd review everything every single day. Then at 11 a.m. I would meet my team leads. So I had 2 appointed team leads that covered internal, external, social media and marketing. So I would brief them on any outcomes from the previous conversation and what our priorities were for the day. And then we would have scheduled to have a daily briefing every single day on our internal communications channels for our teams. So we're quite fortunate that we have multiple ways to communicate with them. But obviously the majority of our workforce would be classed as being offline, so they don't have access to a company email. So we utilize a We're Lidl app that everyone can have on personal or work devices. And then we have an intranet that's available in every store and warehouse as well. So we would have carried a daily briefing there on anything that we wanted to keep the team in the loop on. So, you know, early on there was things like, you know, shortages in hand sanitizer. So it was working to sort of reassure people that we were, you know, investigating supply options and expediting everything that we could. I think, as we referenced the toilet roll debacle, when things were flying off the shelves, you know, very quickly we moved externally to reassure customers. So we threw open the doors of our distribution centres to show stock coming in, to show full warehouses, availability. We showed trucks rolling in and out every single day. So it was really important to get messages across to consumers. So for us, there was never a supply issue. It was demand. We just couldn't keep stuff on the shelves. But, you know, that kind of abated pretty quickly once people saw the level of reassurance we were offering. And then I suppose for us, it was moving to implement things as quickly as we could. So things like elderly shopping hours was something that we were the first to do. And we wanted to I suppose, get out there and show that we sort of were caring and supporting communities as well. So yeah, for us, speed really was probably our biggest strategy was to get out there in front of everything as quickly as we could.
Perfect, thanks Aoife. So Colin, if we chat to you next, you are on the other hand of this, where you experienced, I guess, the opposite. So as Managing Director of Northern Ireland's premier tourism destination, which is Galgorm Spa and Golf Resort, as well as all of the other collection properties, you experienced then the challenges of navigating forced closures, reopenings, furloughing staff, and also the challenges of investing in new safety features throughout all your properties as well. So from your perspective, can you tell us how communications play a role in helping you navigate those challenges?
Yeah, Jerry, I suppose if we wind the clock back to the sort of how we moved into this in March, we were sort of, if I remember the Monday, we were told that not to go to bars, restaurants and hotels, but we had no facility in place to sort of be told to close, which is what we were campaigning for, and to how do we deal with the staff. So we had ran through scenarios. How do we continue to pay everybody? How long can we continue to pay for everyone? So we very quickly became lobbyists, and there was a number of groups set up, and between that Monday and then through to the Friday when the announcement was made, there was there was a lot of sleepless nights. And then once we got the announcement, that sort of week of lobbying you seen had paid off. The furlough announcement came out. we knew we could close the hotel safely and get all our guys paid. And very quickly, then really the communication moved into how do we communicate with our team. We really felt that was the people that was going to continue to communicate with their teams while they're on furlough was going to be the people that were going to come out of this with the team back motivated. We were worried about, very quickly then started to worry about how people's mental health. We launched an EAP scheme very quickly into the first lockdown, and really we were dealing with a number of issues with the sort of isolation. We've quite a young team, 75% of them are under 40. So they really did miss the social interaction, a lot of the reasons why they came into the industry. So really the communications with the team weekly, team meetings, but also then one-to-ones. Customer, then we very much wanted to keep the personal touch. So while there was mass PR and email marketing and social media marketing, we took the decision to call every customer that we were cancelling their bookings or had to cancel their bookings, and that we'd be back in touch. We felt that really that personal contact with every customer was what was needed. And I think that's what stood us in good stead when we did reopen, was instantly the books were full and we could see that out. And then the other side of it was lobbying government. And from the beginning, it was very quickly understood that the government had very little knowledge of our sector, not so much that they didn't know what we did, but how it all worked behind the scenes. And really, we had started pulling together, Asia and Australia, New Zealand had started to open long before us. We pulled off all the plans and regs that the hospitality industries were using over there, put together our own policy and got it into the executive, and really then started to push, every business needs a date to work to, that we had come up with the majority of the ideas of how to make the sector work and keep it safe. And then it was really hammering home the safety message, that we are a safe sector. And that's what I think, won the customers back into the hospitality industry. It was the venues that really took the health and hygiene message first and foremost and put it out there. And then obviously on the ground, implemented it.
Yeah, great. Richard, I'm sure many of our viewers on today's webinar will be familiar with your weekly commentary on the pandemic with your letters from the bunker, which I was personally a massive fan of. As editor of Business Eye magazine, you have the unique perspective of observing how the pandemic affected Northern Irish businesses right across all sectors. And you've also had a bit of an ear up on the hill too. So in your opinion, how did the pandemic impact businesses here, and how vital a role did PR play?
Well, I suppose, first of all, Jerry, can I thanks to you and thanks to everyone at PRCA for having me along today. Glad to be here. It's actually a really interesting subject, and it's a fascinating report. I sometimes get these reports and either pretend to read them or don't read them, but this one I thought was really interesting once I get into it, so well done on that. Now, to try to answer the question, COVID hit some businesses really, really hard. It hit some even harder. It hit some not very hard at all. I mean, as they've just said, Colin and Aoife are from different ends of the scale, if you like. One business forced to close completely, the other which had to trade on successfully. So very different, very specific PR requirements, if you like. And I suppose that was the same for pubs, it was the same for retailers, it was the same for lots of other businesses. I agree with Stephen. PR has played an absolutely crucial role during COVID, and it's been pretty impressive, to be honest. Most obviously, I suppose we could look at the huge role of government comms, and I'm going to come back to that a bit later. And behind that, or alongside that, business and consumer PR has had to square up to all sorts of challenges. So I suppose in some ways, maybe I'm wrong, but I think private sector PR, if I can call it that, had to do battle to some extent against government PR. It wasn't always easy, I'm sure, getting positive business messaging out there during the crisis. But I do think that you guys, or the industry, rose to the challenge. And it's shown also that comms can work really, really well in a crisis, and as Stephen said, remotely. And it was a test for every business. Certainly seemed to work for the PR sector. At Business Eye, just briefly, we set our stall out right from the start. We wanted to champion businesses through the crisis. We wanted to promote the business agenda. And I suppose we wanted to push back against what we saw as some unnecessary restrictions, and to question at times, when appropriate, of course, the Northern Ireland Executive and the Department of Health narrative. And most of the mainstream media simply towed the line and didn't do that. So it might not be core to what we're talking about, but it's a point I wanted to make.
That's great, Richard. Thank you. So moving on to look at another one of Stephen's topics there, we mentioned digital, and we know that digital has been on the rise even before the pandemic, but the COVID-19 crisis has certainly accelerated long-term trends in media to digital. We know that over lockdown, consumers turned to TV news and online news sites for information. I think at its peak, the Downing Street Daily News Briefing attracted an audience of over 27.5 million. And I think an average of 5 million people a day were tuning into that routinely. So we know also that the consumption of printed newspapers fell during lockdown, but overall consumption of media more than doubled via apps and websites. So we can see very clearly there the switch to digital. Social media, messaging and video services also saw huge growth in subscriptions, and the platform now reach more than 85% of the UK adult digital audience. So we can clearly see this shift is happening. So Richard, I suppose going back to you as a business publication, can you tell us how the shift towards digital impacted Business Eye and how you responded to sort of stay ahead of the curve there?
Of course, of course. I suppose we had already started to do a lot more digitally before the pandemic because it was a trend in any case, as you all know. But we certainly had to accelerate it once this all kicked off. Broadcast, newspapers, online are all very well established. Magazines, which is our core business, a lot less so in terms of online. So I suppose what we did was we put a lot more resource into the website. We put a lot more into digital versions of the print magazine. But what we also did, it gave us a chance to move into things like video interviews, video roundtable discussions on business subjects, alongside the weekly blog, which you've already mentioned, Jerry. We were fortunate, I suppose, to have an established database of around about 27,000 subscribers. So that stood us in good stead. And we were actually able to build this during the pandemic, I suppose, because there was a bit of a hunger out there from people wanting to stay in touch. And I think you've alluded to that. They felt isolated and they were consuming a lot more news, views, and other things. So I suppose to look on the bright side, it's done us a favor. Like a lot of businesses who've pivoted, if you use that word, during COVID, we've done much the same. So things like the upgraded website, the video interviews, the video content will stay with us going forward. I should mention business events. I think you touched on it at the start, Jerry. The other side of our business here at Business Eye, we're longing to get back to big business awards events, and not just because they're a revenue stream for us, although that's important. We want to get back to them because they're real, because people can mix, because they're live. And I think we're more confident than ever now that we'll be able to get back, maybe hopefully during the autumn months. Because let's face it, online awards events, we're okay, a bit of a novelty, a diversion, but compared to live ones, they're rubbish, let's be honest. As for Zoom interviews, Zoom calls, great technology. I never used it before COVID, but if I never had to do another interview by Zoom, I'd be a happy man.
Thanks, Richard. Aoife, if we go back to you then, Lidl Northern Ireland's obviously very engaged with digital anyway. And I know earlier this year, you launched the Lidl Plus Rewards app in the region. So can you just tell us a little bit about how important digital is to your marketing mix and how you employed this during the pandemic to keep reaching those new and engaged audiences?
Yeah, absolutely. We launched Lidl Plus a couple of months ago now, and obviously as an app-based rewards program, its digital was always going to feature very heavily in our plans. We're really fortunate. We've got really strong following across our social channels in Northern Ireland. So it's definitely become an area that people come to us because we've got really engaging content and because we engage with people quite proactively there. So we were really engaged around social and digital in promoting the app, and I suppose it was for us a key place to drive awareness as well for non-Lidl shoppers. So we've had a fantastic reaction since we've launched it. We've had really strong downloads and usage of it as well. But we've also used our channels throughout the pandemic to do different things. You know, I hate using the same words, but like pivoting to doing events and stuff online. So we've hosted like wine tastings online using influencers as well. So we've tried definitely to use our channels, I suppose, to keep people engaged with the brand. You know, maybe there was people for some reason weren't going out shopping as well. They were being more cautious. So we were just trying to find ways to still engage and keep our customers happy.
Sure. I know Aoife, influencer marketing was a key part of the mix, particularly last year, and it's continued into 2021. How important was that for you, and how did you engage with that?
Yeah, it's really important. So yeah, as I said, we try to, we've missed out on being at events, like Richard said. Nothing compares to actually being at places. So, you know, as I said, we've used influencers in a whole host of different areas for sort of cooking and for entertaining. And we've just employed, I suppose, many different ways to keep people engaged with us. So it's really, really important. I think it's something going forward, even when events are back, we'll still probably find some sort of hybrid way of doing it, because I suppose it also gets to reach people maybe for various reasons that can't travel or can't be at events in person either.
Yeah, great, thanks Aoife. Colin, so coming back to Galgorm Collection then, obviously the collection encompasses a range of stunning properties across Northern Ireland, from Galgorm Spa and Golf Resort to Castle Bar and Kitchen, 2 Belfast restaurants, Cafe Parisian and Fratelli's, and the Rabbit Hotel and Retreat. So obviously you're already very engaged in digital communications, but how was this upweighted, or how did this change at all over the pandemic, especially with the forced closures?
I think a couple of trends that we'd seen coming and maybe using a lot more, and it just sped everything up. Video being a huge one, which plays, you know, great into our hands. Coming out of this experience-led visitor experiences is what people want. They want to do new things. They want to do things they can take photographs of. They want the video. They want to be the first to have done it. They want to brag. They want to make sure that everybody knows what they're doing. And so that plays great into the hospitality and tourism sector. And I suppose video was there, but video is now just became everything. And even from a selling point of view, we can see the difference of a product that we've just, like maybe a bedroom or one of the lodges, we've just taken photos of it and we're waiting on the video coming. The speed that the booking pattern and rate per night takes the minute you put the video on is huge, and the minute you can get it out there. Like literally we have products now that you literally just need to finish them, take a video of them, put them on, and you know, like our customer base has always been, you know, 72% of our customer base is under 44, and we know this. So social's always been huge for us, and the different platforms work better for different products. But if anything, I would sort of say that coming out of this, and we did a quick chat earlier about, you know, what is it going to be, the roaring 20s? Genuinely, we're seeing, I think people, premium is where it was going, and this has just sped it up. No matter what market you're in or sector you're in, I think people want premium. They're happier to pay for it as long as it's what they want and it's at the quality they want. And value for money sits there, but value for money doesn't mean that it's less expensive or anything. It just means that they're getting what they pay for. So I do think that's they're the things that are genuinely, and speed. Everything is now at speed, you know. So feedback, if a customer has an issue, everything is communicated there and then. It could still be here. The good thing about that is you've got time to go and fix it. If they're still sitting in their bedroom while they're posting their review or their feedback, you can. So if anything, the speed is another thing I think plays into this industry's hands. But it does mean everything is happening at, you know, a fast pace, and you just have to react to it.
Yeah. Great, thanks, Colin. Stephen, I'll actually just finish off this section with you on the topic of digital. I know in the report that it stated that the COVID-19 crisis accelerated the move to digital, both in internal and external communications, and it reinforced some fundamental principles that people generally want authentic stories from people that they trust rather than contrived marketing, basic information rather than spin, and they want clarity and not complexity. So in your experience, what can businesses do to improve their digital engagement and communicate that authenticity that consumers are now demanding?
So I'd say, Jerry, look to the colleagues here who've come before me and are speaking, who've, you know, really leaned into creating their own content, creating their own channels, and ultimately building community and using those as a feedback loop, because in each instance there you've got three best in class examples. So Richard building engagement with the local business community, and creating events. Really interesting actually that he's seen a growth in his readers, because that's entirely consistent, and I really hope that continues, and I have absolutely no doubt an organization that's been there for us during the crisis, during hard times, we are going to be loyal to as we emerge from the crisis. So Aoife talked about social and digital channels used for internal and external communication. And yes, we were having this conversation as we just before we came on air, weren't we, about whether we're going to see the roaring 20s as we emerge from the crisis. Because I completely agree with Colin. I want experiences. I want a bit of luxury, because frankly, this has been a really tough time, and we want to spend what money we've saved, if we've been lucky enough to save on experiences, and to produce a brand that's producing beautiful content, that's sharing those experiences in the way he is with his properties, is going to be engaging. And it's really interesting actually to hear that there's a direct correlation between sharing content and bookings, because if it's done in an authentic way, it works. So I'd start by listening to your audience, your community, finding the right channels that work for you, and producing content that's appropriate to engage them. And we've got 3 colleagues here that have done exactly that.
Yeah. Great, thanks, Stephen. Just very quickly, there's just one more topic area I want to dive into, and that's around the issue of misinformation, which I think was really key over lockdown. The findings of your report, Stephen, showed that at the height of the crisis, around half of UK adults said that they had seen content that they identified as false or misleading. Aoife, I suppose if we start with you as an essential retailer, did you experience any problems with misinformation, and how did you handle it?
Yeah, absolutely. We did. And I suppose our approach would have been to tackle it head on. Social media, I suppose, in particular, gives rise to a lot of misinformation. And I suppose just about anyone can post anything. So, we did communicate proactively. We were clear, I suppose, in particular around the start of the year, when I suppose the protocol came into place in Northern Ireland, and there was a lot of supply issues for supermarkets in Northern Ireland in particular. And there was a lot of people going on about how it was going to lead to massive food shortages. And, we came out very clearly with some images, strong images taken in stores that particular day, of full shelves, full availability, and, got the message out to people that, we had prepared as a business actively for Brexit. We had invested a huge amount in planning for it. And for that reason, we didn't have shortages. But similarly then throughout the pandemic, whenever people would have said, oh, you had no sanitizer in store, we would have gotten quickly, images back of stores in question, where we would have posted and said, look, it's here, maybe you missed it, maybe it wasn't in the place you thought it would be. So yeah, we would have just tackled it head on.
Yeah. Perfect, thanks, Aoife. And Colin, I suppose your role sort of changed, particularly last year, after the closure of the collection properties, and you moved into sort of more of a lobbying role, and you really were a champion on behalf of the tourism and hospitality industry there in terms of managing the reopening, and calling for the safe and full reopening as soon as possible. Did you encounter any examples of misinformation or inaccurate reporting over that time? And again, how did you handle that?
Yeah, I think it was twofold. It was one, like as an industry, we live on feedback, and with daily meetings about it internally, and it was about, like as Aoife had talked about, dealing with it head on. I'm a firm believer, quote facts and figures, be clear, concise, but also don't be scared to defend yourself from a business point of view if you need to, especially if you haven't done anything wrong. But also then from the lobbying point of view, and as a point Richard had touched on earlier, was that we sort of, as an industry, we found ourselves having to go head to head with the government on a number of occasions, whether it be government or government advisors, and really having to be out there putting our message across, and really pushing for, one was to get open and then staying open, and genuinely that we didn't feel we were part of the problem. We felt we were part of the solution, and it was really then trying to get that message across all channels that we could. But it was, at a very difficult time, and then at times trying to work with the government and really get your point across, that was being taken maybe in other countries and was seen to be working. So I really do think last year, definitely from a external PR piece, like a complete learning curve for us, but we come out the far side of it, I do think, in a completely different position and a completely different viewpoint.
Richard, I suppose really keen to get your media perspective on this. Have you seen any examples of yourself, or have you been in touch with any businesses that have reported problems with misinformation or inaccurate reporting? And I suppose as a publication, what do you do to safeguard against that?
Well, where do I start with this one? It's look, I think there are plenty of instances, I think, of misinformation during the pandemic. Anyone working on news desks has had to be really careful. Misinformation about vaccines springs to mind, but there's loads of others. But I suppose I'm turning this slightly on its head. What I'd highlight is this. I mean, there's a lot in the report about the success of government communications, so NHS comms, if you like, and they certainly were successful. But as I said just a few moments ago, they were rarely questioned, I don't know about the rest of you, but reading through sections of the report, I felt a little bit uneasy. I'm not very comfortable with the concept of a government-run disinformation rapid response unit or a counter disinformation cell. It all sounds a bit like the Stasi in East Germany back in the 1960s, So it's something it's the other side of the information fence, if you like. Also, it's a little bit off the point, but in GB, the report talks about lighter touch communications by government using humor and celebrities, all very good. And I think it worked very well in GB. It wasn't really the case here. We were stuck with a fairly dry, fairly authoritarian approach, and didn't work terribly well for me. I don't know about the rest of you. And just one final thing, again, picking something out of the report, there was a heading on, I think, on the CIPR president's piece, if I'm right, saying, are we ready for the normal that is not coming back? I think what we're seeing now is a normal that is coming back, and maybe not entirely, but fairly close to it. I certainly hope so. So let's be positive and let's keep on being positive. So there you go. You asked the question.
Thanks, Richard. Well, that segues nicely into the next section here, which is really getting your thoughts on the future recovery period and how critical a role PR and communications is going to play in that. Aoife, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I suppose echoing a lot of stuff that's in the report. For me, I think it's how you're going to engage with people in the best way. I suppose for us as a retailer, given that we have a huge amount of people offline, it's really important that we find ways to engage and monitor, I suppose, and look and see how our posts and everything are received, so that we can, see what's working and not working. So looking at the data around those as well is really important. So being able to interpret analytics is becoming more and more part of our, I suppose, our daily routine. I think what Stephen mentioned earlier as well, multi-agency approach, I think it's one good thing that's come out of it for us is, more of a willingness for agencies to work together and kind of on unified messaging. And I think, we wouldn't be it wouldn't be true to say before that all agencies would have been aligned. Very much PR agencies and marketing agencies maybe sometimes were pursuing different agendas, but I think when you see sort of something like COVID has brought it all together, that we can go out with one approach and come at it from different angles and achieve something really strong. And then just my last point would probably be around the authenticity of what you're talking about as well. So for us, using really credible ambassadors or people from within our own organisation has become really, really important for us.
Great, thanks, Aoife. And Colin, from your perspective, obviously Galgorm Collection has acquired a few new properties recently, so you're expanding at a rapid rate. What do you think the role how do you think PR and comms is going to play a role for you moving forward as we go into recovery period, but also at a crucial period of growth and expansion for yourself?
No, I think for our business has moved. I say premium is where everyone seems to be moving, and the individual wants choice. So every booking now needs to be individual. So I think that's how we communicate that. And speak to each person individually, but also speak with a joined up message when you're going out with PR and marketing. I also think that, like, I do think what we're seeing is people want the experiences they had, so people want the face-to-face, and I don't think that's, I think the drive is, as people, we want to get back to face-to-face interaction. We're seeing that with, small meetings. Definitely, I think Zoom Teams all have a place, but I do think there is things that will come back, because people can't wait to get back at them, and whether that be small business meetings, the big conferences, maybe that how they come back will be interesting to see. But definitely from our point of view, it'll all be in the individual and how we tailor the bookings and then how we communicate that to them.
Great, thanks, Colin. So just another question on, I guess, recovery moving forward. And I know Stephen and Aoife, you also touched on that point about authenticity. We've seen certainly over the pandemic that consumers are increasingly demanding that organisations have purpose at their heart and that the purpose is genuine. And communicators are obviously at the heart of that change. So in terms of corporate social responsibility, how important do you think that's been for Lidl, Aoife?
Yeah, it was important long before COVID, and it'll continue to be important for us even post COVID, whenever that is. We were quite proactive in this area at the start, so we would have had charity partnerships that were up for renewal during that period. We made the decision to extend those. So with NSPCC Northern Ireland to I suppose give them continuity as well and give them confidence throughout the pandemic. We would have launched food donation appeals with our food redistribution charities as well, because we would have recognised that there was a lot of people who were being pushed, I suppose, into food poverty, being on furlough schemes as well. We continued our Lidl Community Works programme, and then we were separately still working on important environmental initiatives. So we were launching biogas fuel trucks that take food waste from stores in Northern Ireland and sort of redistribute it, I suppose, in other ways. So they use that waste is turned into fuel for trucks that then bring products back to stores. So yeah, really, really important, even pre-COVID, as I said, but we'll focus even more on it. I think, as you say, consumers are more demanding of it as well. They want to know that you're doing good, not just in your communities, but for the planet as well.
Sure. And Colin, I know Galgorm Collection had a major announcement last year with the donation of £750,000 worth of vouchers for NHS staff in the local area. So I guess from your perspective, what role does CSR play in future recovery?
It was always there. I think the difference now, we look at things like we've been working with Simon Community for nearly 10 years now, and that link between a luxury hotel and a homeless charity was always very important to us. A large number of the local sports clubs, schools, and the community partnerships locally. So on the ground, I think all those things were important, and we decided to continue all those right through ourselves. The NHS donation came around we were being contacted by NHS workers for donations of slippers, donations of any medical uniforms that we would have had, and our spa therapists would have used all of those. Then we started donating bedroom amenities because they were all wanted to shower before they went home, and then it really just got us into, well, how are we going to make a difference coming out of this? And we thought the morale in the NHS was going to be the big thing that maybe needed help, and that's where the voucher donation came out. And we were very clear we wanted to do it inside County Antrim. We've always been very clear, anything we work with is close to home and to make a difference on the ground. But coming out of this, I think the move will be that it's a thing that it's something that was good to do, or some responsible companies did it. It will be moved to that it's expected now, and I think that's a given that the general public now expect you to be doing this, and you expect to be part of your community and helping. I think a big move that I'm hoping to see, and we've sort of done some of this we've set up a Northern Ireland hospitality school to take people in and train them in the industry, and we've linked in with the local college and council to do this. So what I'm hoping to see is a lot more of those public-private partnerships that have came about over the last sort of 14 months, that a lot of private businesses and government have been working together. I'd be keen that they all continue, because I do think the future is public and private working together and not in silos that would have potentially been in the past. So that would be the biggest hope. And then environmental is it's not even it's coming, it's here, and it's the here and now, and it's about how you're going to commit for the future. And, we have done things, we're committing to be carbon neutral by 2026. So how do we move in this direction that you're actually living in tandem with your local environment?
Yeah. Great, thanks, Colin. And finally, Richard, just keen to get your perspective on it. How important is CSR from a media perspective in telling that story of authenticity and purpose, and how can organisations get it right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've had two good answers from companies who actually do this and live it on the ground, so they probably know more than I do. But if you'd asked me 10 years ago what CSR was, I probably wouldn't have had a clue. But now it's mentioned in almost every business interview I think I do. They're all almost rushing to get it in there. I'll give you a fairly brief answer, though. The danger with CSR, as I see it, is that it can be about sound bites. It can be about paying lip service. I've probably heard lots of empty words over the years. So for me, it's about honesty, it's about authenticity, and it's about keeping it simple. If you're going to connect with the community, then do something concrete and tangible for that community. Keep it real.
Great. So we're coming nearly to the end of our webinar session. So just to finish off, I'd just like to get your thoughts on what key skills you think PR practitioners will need to employ in this next stage of the pandemic, and sort of what can we be doing now to make sure that we have those skills. Aoife, we'll kick off with you.
Yeah, I think looking at, I suppose, the document, for me, the data that I mentioned earlier, being able to interpret the data to better deliver, I suppose, content to your audience, but either internal or external, for me is becoming more and more important, especially when you're delivering a huge amount of content out every day and every week. And then I think the relationship management, I think we've had such a great opportunity with COVID, as Stephen referenced earlier, to I suppose propel ourselves into that top bracket of management and to be strategic. So I think building on those relationships and really showing the value that PR can bring to your entire organisation.
Great. And Colin, your thoughts just on what key skills PR practitioners will need to employ moving forward?
I think that you totally cited the personal touch, and and I would agree with Aoife there. They're now right at the top table in every organisation. I share an office with our internal and external comms because it became so important that they needed to be hearing all the conversations that I was having and getting everything real time. So I think that's been the biggest thing, is that they're now the cornerstone of the organisation, right at the top, and getting the information real time and actually part of the decision making. And the decisions are now made by, do these people think it's the right decision going forward? So I think that's the big change.
Great, thanks, Colin. And Stephen, just a final word from you then, just to sum up about the power of PR in this recovery phase, and what you think the main skills are going to be moving forward.
I think Aoife and Colin have got it well covered. There's that, embrace that opportunity to work at a management level. That requires going beyond the, core craft skills, but, understanding, how businesses operate and working within that context. The one thing I'd say though, and everyone's picked this up today, you feel the real palpable energy to want to get back to face-to-face meetings and some sort of normality. And I think the most important thing for me is going to be relearning social skills as we go back to face-to-face meetings and meeting in person, and I cannot come fast enough.
Great, thanks, Stephen. Well, a massive thank you to all of our panelists for joining the PRCA Northern Ireland and LK Communications today for this webinar. Morag, I'll just let you wrap up.
No, that's fantastic. Loads of takeaways, absolutely buzzing with ideas. Thank you to everybody for your contributions. It was really valuable. I think we could have gone on, but we promised a hard stop, let people get their lunch. I put my contact details in the chat function if anybody wants to get in touch about PRCA or has ideas for future events. This was something that came to light a few weeks ago, and thanks to Jerry, we've turned it around, and I think it was very timely. So thank you, everybody, and good afternoon.